Welcome back to Briggs on Books, an international talk show where we talk to authors from all over the world and learn about their books and their inspiration and how did they even get a book published. It's so hard to do that. Yesterday was Holocaust Remembrance Day, and I spent a lot of the day remembering and studying about the Holocaust, and good thing that I booked this next guest for today because her book, Witness for My Father, I think traces some of that story from a personal angle. Welcome, Barbara. I didn't ask how to say your last name, Bergren. How's that?
That's perfect. Hi.
I don't know if I got the introduction correct or close enough, but tell us a little bit about your book.
Okay. First of all, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, and I'm impressed that you did some history with the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I did pick the date specifically because every year I tried to speak about it. As you probably know, what's really unusual is yesterday, January 27th, was 80 years since they liberated the Auschwitz concentration camp. I do it for a few reasons. One of them is to make sure we remember there were about 1 million people, a little over 1 million people, most of them Jewish, who were murdered at that concentration camp. And also a reminder that over the course of the war, there were 6 million Jewish people who lost their lives. And that's just such a huge number. And I'm sharing the story of one family, which brings it to light, and that is my dad, and his family, which is my family as well. So there's a photo of his family that are sitting together, taken in the early 1930s, and his mother is Sonia, who I was named after. It's my middle name now. And his father, Isaac, my grandfather, and then there's a little baby on Sonia's lap, and that is his baby sister Clara, and that's Clara with a K. I like to bring their names back. I like to keep them alive, and I also like to speak to their legacies, which is what a lot of the book is about, especially the first half, when you get to meet the family in extraordinary, ordinary days. This biography, it is a story of devastating loss, but it is also hope and the triumph of human kindness. So that's going to be a theme of this. I am Witness for My Father. That's where the title came from. And my Holocaust survivor, Martin Wigan, that's his American name. And back in the day, there were a lot of name changes, depending on what country and where you were going. I thought that was normal, but it's not. And he was born Mieczysław Wygensberg in Poland, Starowitz, Poland, and they called him Mietek for short. So in the book, there's a lot about Mietek. This biography it started actually as a memoir and turned into a biography, so it gives you a little bit of how it developed. It all began with one phone call, and that unlocked a secret and an untold story I'd never heard of. So I'm in with my dad, he ran a small business. I was part of it, part-time, and we were on this call. And when we got off, I thought, oh my gosh, I'd never heard this name, I never heard this story. So we hung up the phone, I looked at my dad, and I said, who is John Withers? Because this is the man his son had called us. And my dad very simply stood up and he said, Berb, which is what he called me. He had a Polish accent, but that's A with an umlaut. And he said, he and his men put me back on my feet. So, of course, my first feeling was a feeling of elation that somebody helped my dad after his liberation. And it also started to make me wonder, I wondered how we got past the atrocity. I also wondered how he wasn't a bitter man or an angry man. He was very kind. And he held a lot in, but overall he was very kind, very smart, and soft-spoken. So Dad endured 6 years
Oh boy.
under the Nazi occupation and during World War II. He survived his home slave labor camp, then he went to Auschwitz, then to Buchenwald, and eventually to Dachau concentration camp. He was at Auschwitz, but about a few days before the liberation, they forced the strongest of the weakest to go on a death march out of Auschwitz. And the Allies were coming in, so the Americans and the British were coming in from the west, the Russians were coming in from the east, and the Russians actually liberated Auschwitz. Now, my father would be liberated at Dachau, but not for 3 months, so
Okay.
timing was a big deal. And he calls it his other birthday. So at liberation, as he said to me, he said, Barb, you know, I had no country, no family, no money, no home. And he was 16, he was orphaned, and he weighed less than 90 pounds because this is at the end of, he was one of the few who survived. Dad, and this is at the heart of the story, Dad was rehabilitated physically and emotionally and hid, because this was against the rules, by a segregated African-American army troop that was led by John Withers. And they stayed together for over a year. The men, John and my dad, would reunite after this phone call after 55 years.
Wow.
That's kind of an opening to what the story's about.
Does your book pick up there or go on from there about the reunion?
Yes, there's the almost first half is really historical. It takes you into the family, you get to meet them, you get to see how they live. And the second part is, it jumps forward, and we start with the phone call, and we go. And there's a lot that happens in the second part as well, because the story took on just a life of its own.
Now, you didn't know, you grew up not really knowing the full story? Your dad probably did not talk about it much.
That is correct. There are many, many who don't talk about it, and especially, I think, as an orphan. And for this book, I interviewed a lot of survivors. My friend, one of my dad's friends from his hometown, who, you know, they suffered together, they did survive. She helped me understand a little bit more about his town, and I was able to, with other research and also a major interview that I was, you know, the Wall Street Journal actually interviewed my father for the story, and that's a whole other story. But that interview ended up being a gift, because my brother wanted to tape it, and we're very, very private people, but it was a gift because it became his testimony. So a lot of the details came out during the interview, which I was really afraid, because for my father to have to open up now, you know, he was a man in his 70s at the time, really, really concerned me. But that led to hours and hours of interviewing, and the piece actually ran on the front page of the Wall Street Journal.
Wow.
In the early 2000s. The phone call took place, by the way, in 2001. So I don't know how much of it you want to...
No, this is fascinating. Here is the book cover, by the way, and we've been looking at the pictures as you're discussing them. I was going to ask you, and you told us, why January 27th is Holocaust Remembrance Day. You said it's 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. It was one of the first big camps in Auschwitz. And this is important, you know, for anybody when I teach, either even at colleges or community religious places, especially the students, I usually have a picture of Auschwitz. And if you're going to remember any of them, that was one of the biggest killing centers. So part of the education is to, especially living with it with my dad, and he had a tattoo, A19107, on his left arm. And by the way, people who were in the concentration camps, many didn't know this, but Auschwitz was the only one that tattooed the prisoners of war. And I grew up around it. It was part of my dad. So I viewed it different because I was a little girl, and it was just part of my loving father. So he had, best way to describe it, he had a wonderful innate understanding of integrity. So think about going through the camps, being orphaned. He lost his mother and sister on October 27th, 1942. That was when they did a selection in the towns they lived in. And his, this is a very hard chapter, obviously, to write and edit 1,000 times. But he had to, at the age of 14, so some of the details that came out, I never knew exactly. I thought he was younger. I was happy to hear he had his mother with him until 14. And his younger sister didn't make the cut because the Nazis only wanted people who could work. She was only 11. So the story unfolds from a whole different chapter, because they were at least together when they were in a ghetto within their hometown of Starhowitze. So he and his father is, in the story, he's a remarkable man. And because of his father, I believe he survived. He learned traits. They were a lot of risk-taking and, changing. I'll tell you a story. One of the things I realized with the decision-making, I taught it was a civics law class at a college, and this is just about a month ago. Usually I customize and I go, how do you teach this? And I thought, the book is a true story. It's a narrative nonfiction, and you had to be, there were decisions made throughout the whole book that changed people's lives. Like the phone call changed my life. And part of it was survival. The other part for decision-making was even John Withers, who was a lieutenant, and he was a black lieutenant who wanted to get his PhD, and he wanted to keep his soldiers safe. He had to make a life-changing decision to keep this boy who walked to their encampment. And you have to read the book to see why he left. He was on his own. And there was a rule that no prior prisoners of war could be taken in because diseases are running rampant, and they weren't really sure, the army itself and the how they would react after being tortured and starved and beaten and whatever. So for him to then make a decision, he was going to send him back to a DP camp, displaced persons camp. And when he met him, and there was another boy involved, so without telling too much, but he made the decision and risked getting a dishonorable discharge. And his men, he had to cover, because they were, I actually didn't know until I started research, they were still segregated in the 1940s.
Wow.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
They also couldn't serve in the same capacity. They were a supply unit. So what I did during the time was, whenever there was a big decision to be made that was life-changing, I slowed it down. I told them it was their turn to decide how they would have handled it, because their courses are to prepare them for running, it could be large healthcare systems, businesses, but their in civics classes is really about your moral compass and how you're going to make decisions for many other people, once they get out into the workforce.
I hesitate to ask this question because it seems self-apparent, but I ask every author this, is who should read this book?
That's a really good question, because that's not an easy question.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, obviously historians who are into history, especially for World War II, because there's a lot, and how it unfolded, and you see it going each step by step. Humanitarians, because this really is about the best and the worst of humanity,
Yeah.
and both parts are covered. It also the individuals who seek hope and inspiration, because my father's life was, an extraordinary example of resilience. And even when I was teaching the civics course, or lecturing, I should say, it was decisions that could change the course of other people's lives. And my dad's always been my hero. He continues to be. I actually had something came up in December that was surprising. I was having a hard time making a decision, and to my husband, I said, let's invite my dad in. And he loved my dad too. So we invited him in. He has passed. And I knew exactly what he would say. So if for inspirational purposes, this is a really good book to see someone come out of the worst of human, atrocities, and how he changed, moved forward, and did not lose his humanity. And that's really, I think I had mentioned, Mike, that I'll tell you a little bit about how the story did take off. So the Wall Street Journal became interested because it was one of the writers, Brian Grulley, and had tried to get permission, and John Withers' son called me, and I said, we're really too private. I can't imagine my dad would want to do this. And my dad said, my brother and I met with him and said, this is a national stage. And he said, if this will help John Withers, I'll do it. Another life-changing decision, because, I said, well, it's going to be out there. And it was his way of saying thank you to John. They were together, the troop and my father and this other Jewish boy. Think about it. They had to hide them when they came in because there were, as John Withers said, two white Jewish boys amongst a black African troop.
Yeah.
So, African-American troop. But, so that led to really getting his testimony and detail, and something I do share for all you writers or students or anyone else. What I learned from the interview was remember to ask about the good stuff too. So that's why the opening line was, did you have your own bedroom? Did you live in a house?
Yeah.
And yes, he did, and he had his own bedroom, and I thought, wow, because we were always afraid to ask questions. And also, the feedback we got was all surrounding about the kindness that these men showed, and they became a family.
Yeah.
Reader's Digest did a piece on it as well. The Washington Post did something, and then the book ends in 2003, but 2 years later, actually, CNN, the Wolf Blitzer report, did a piece on it that John Withers and I were together. My father had passed. And so it resonates with so many people. And one of the lines I usually use is, always remember and never forget the power of acts of kindness. So it's a story, and we have won 4 major awards, 3 gold, and we were also, I always say it's their story. I had the honor of authoring the book and doing a lot of work. But one of the awards was the Pipeline, was a movie adaptation. We made the finalist, and this was a tough one. So, but one day, you have to really know people in Hollywood.
Yeah.
But so I'm very proud of their story and what they did and how it helps other people when they read it and what it can do. And it changed my life.
Yeah. Barbara, we're way past time, but I can't stop talking to you. What's most amazing, so many amazing things we have come out just talking to you, but how amazing that one phone call that came through changed everything. Had that not happened, this story would be lost to history.
We had we had some, and he had a great story, and I knew that. I knew the camps he had gone to. He finally told me, but I didn't know the details. And you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And so it was John Withers' son, John Withers II, who the phone call was with. And he started the call and he said, "Hello, Martin." He says, "I've been looking for you for 2 years."
Wow.
So he took a sabbatical. They worked for state departments. And so yes, you're absolutely right, Mike. That's exactly what happened.
Barbara, I told you before the interview, I wish I could read all the books of the people I talked to, but this is the one I'll read. I'll get it this week, in fact. And I hope you can come back again and again. Before we go, any last thoughts you want to share before we have to disconnect?
I'm trying to think if, first of all, the book can be bought anywhere. Amazon, any bookstores, whatever. If they're not on the shelf, they can order them. I think my website is up there,
We have it on the screen, yes.
Bergren.com if you want. And also, feel free if you have any questions, want to discuss anything. It's Barbara S. Bergren at gmail.com. And I'm, very helpful for other writers. And I'm really just so happy to be on today. I was really appreciate Mike being on this show and having a chance to get to meet you and talk to you as well. So, if there are any questions, I'm really open to that. And just remember, never forget the power of acts of kindness.
Thank you, Barbara. And for our guests, I always say this: don't go and click once at Amazon. Order 5 copies. There's got to be somebody that would appreciate and enjoy getting this book as a gift, because that's what I will do. And for our viewers, please don't go anywhere. We will be right back with another author right after this.